I've always had a weird group of friends. They all went into manly careers like logging, oil rig work, construction. I'm the black sheep of our little group of high school buddies. I went into IT. They give me all the time about working on nerd stuff, and I give them back. Me no likey computer, me dig. I'm an unlikely addition to their group of friends, but it works somehow. So there we are in a bar. This is one of those rare occasions when everyone's back in town together and we're getting drunk, swapping stories about horrors on the job. Someone talks about when part of their oil rig blew up, killing 3 people a few years ago. Danny, an actual lumberjack, talks about seeing a guy working not 10 feet from him get his arm torn clean off by a log line. Just a quick zip and a limb went flying. He held a shirt to the wound as the man bled out, babbling and whining in agony until a life flight came 2 hours too late. And all the while I'm sitting there knowing I've got a story, but it's not the kind of story I'd usually bring up to a bunch of drunk sort of friends. Not the kind of story I'd tell anybody. It's the kind of truly unsettling memory that you worry should you tell it. You might give it life. You might feed it somehow, make it more real. I carry it around in the back of my mind like a caged, dangerous animal, not considering letting it out. Until now. Everyone said something already, and I'm just sitting there looking sheltered, looking obvious, so I ignore that voice in my head that says, don't. I ignore my dry, tightening throat. Don't, I've got one. My voice cracks, and they look surprised. I'm surprised. They all give me doubtful, amused looks. Go on then, the looks say, and so I do. I work from home on our 30 acres outside of a small town in Alaska. I live alone, no kids. It's a college town, just a small liberal arts college of a few hundred, but it's the heart of the town. The campus is huge, with the natural beauty of the area being a big draw. Reservation land neighbors the campus, and the tribe sort of acts like park rangers for the hundreds of miles of forest trails. My own land borders part of the campus on the other side. One day I'm out at the edge of the cleared part of my property right behind my house. It's probably about 200 yards from the house. I'm watering a set of raised beds I have right near the tree line, just enjoying the scorching sunny day. And that's when something weird happens. There's this sound, like a record of someone speaking coming from a few hundred feet into the woods. It's like someone talking to you through a bad cell connection, where only parts of the words are coming through and it's just noise, but you can tell it's supposed to be words. I just stood there listening to the noise, curious but not afraid. I didn't even turn the hose off. I think, looking back, that's why it took me so long to get freaked out, to start taking it seriously. Weird things like that, supernatural things, they happen at night, deep in the woods, not at 1 o'clock in the afternoon while standing right in your backyard. After about 30 seconds, it just stops. I turn the water off, then figure out if it actually stopped or just got quieter. Nothing. I file it away as a minor oddity, something to be brought up later as a casual conversation token, or more likely forgotten. That was my first regret. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I'm on a hike at the back of my property on one of the trails I started last summer, which is pretty overgrown at this point. I'm strolling, lost in thought beneath the tree cover, simply enjoying the gorgeous midsummer weather. I'm pulled from my thoughts when I hear the odd sound in the woods far in the distance. There's the sound of garbled human speech. The forest around me, though, is oddly quiet now. I'm not much of a risk taker, and I generally prefer looking irrational to looking dead. I casually turn and walk back towards the trail entrance, not wanting to encourage any large predators by fleeing suddenly. What the hell's making that sound anyway? I resolve to bring Danny along to check it out when he comes to visit in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm back at the trailhead alone because Danny bailed on me. I told him that if I died, I'd be coming straight to his apartment to haunt the out of him. I'm looking down the seemingly innocuous forest trail. I steel myself. I check my pack bear spray and brand new Bowie knife, which I have no idea how to use. It's just a sound, I tell myself. I start down the path. A few miles and about an hour in, I hear the first signs of that odd sound in the distance. It's maybe 100 yards ahead and just off the side of the trail. The forest, however, moves and rustles with life in that familiar, reassuring way. I carry on. As I approach the origin of the sound, I put my hand to the hilt of my Bowie knife. The source of the sound, now within 20 feet or so, is not immediately apparent. It's the same stream of incoherent babble, but with a distinct crackling sound to it. Looking up, I see a small black speaker fixed to a tree about 10 feet from the ground. Fairly confident the speaker poses no threat, I take my hand from my knife and inspect it. Written on the side of the speaker in white paint is the name of the local college and the words Forestry Department. Clue and a reasonable explanation. Go figure. Content that I won't have to stab anything or haunt any apartments this day, I head back home. During a slow day the next week, I call the forestry department of the college. Yes, I'd like to speak to the dean. No, I'm not a student. No, they don't know I'm calling. The dean answered in a bored voice, but seemed eager to answer my questions as if I were the highlight of an otherwise mundane day. As it turns out, the speaker is, or was, a sort of live art project in which students could write and record poems to be spoken aloud in the forest. It's solar paneled, but he suspected the connection to the speaker I found had gone bad. Once per semester, someone was supposed to come out and upload new MP3s to a waterproof MP3 player near the base of each tree. He went on to say that they discontinued the project due to outcry from the nearby tribe. Initially, he ignored their request to take down the speakers, but the vice president of the college eventually stepped in when complaints persisted, worried about souring good relations with the tribe. They probably missed my station when they went to take them all down, he said. Mystery solved. Hiking season passes without incident. About a month after the snows finally melt, I decide to go on another hike on the trail with the speaker. I've got some overnight camping gear with me, and I plan to camp out near my turnaround point a few hours away. I almost miss the speaker when I'm about an hour in. It's completely silent now. I stop to poke at the electronics event, but there's nothing obviously wrong with it. The fraying connections appear to have finally worn out over the winter. I continue down the trail. About 2 hours later, I've set up my tent and prepared a simple camp. It's late afternoon, but I'm restless, and with a few hours of daylight left, I decide to walk ahead of my turnaround point for a little bit. I pick a little offshoot trail that leads upward, perhaps with the promise of a nice view. Just a few minutes into the walk, my mind is drifting. I'm just soaking up the late afternoon sun and basking in the first good weather of the season. I've picked the perfect time to explore. Damn, this is nice, I think to myself. And a moment later, I hear that familiar, unsettling sound of speaking in the distance. I pause on the trail, my brain still registering the noise as something innocuous. This sound is a little different, and even so far away, I can tell that it's a higher quality than the first speaker. I get closer and have to go a little off the trail to make out the words. It's definitely missing that crackly sound, so I can easily make out the words. It's the sound of a woman reading poems, just as the dean said. Less perturbed than I once was, I decide to sit on a rock near the speaker, pull out my water and take a little break. I'm sitting there listening to the sounds of the forest and the voice reading the familiar poems. It still feels a little eerie though, and after just a few minutes I decide it's time to get going again. I toss my water bottle into my pack and stand to leave, and that's when I hear the other voice. Someone nearby is babbling these crazy nonsense words. I perk up, curious but not yet afraid. It has this strange warbling sound, like the natural rise and fall of pitch in a sentence, but in all the wrong places, like someone turning random words in a sentence into questions. It's the kind of sound you'd laugh at if you weren't alone in a forest miles and miles from help. The forest goes dead silent around me, as if flipping a switch. The sound begins trailing close through some thick brush in front of me. I'm totally frozen in place, just listening to this ridiculous noise like a giant basso baby voice. I utter under my breath, "What the hell?" I see just a glimpse of something coming through the brush, and then my trance is broken. My conscious mind is slammed to the back seat as my animal instincts send me sprinting back toward the trail. I'm already careening back down the trail before I even realized what I was running from. And then it hits me, a wall of realization, a great towering cloud of cold, crippling realization. I actually stumble. My neurons fire in slow motion. The implications are forming in my mind like a slowly condensing water droplet, just before the release and then the fall. My chest tightens and I take a sudden sharp breath. It was a hand, some kind of elongated, grotesque hand reaching through the brush, a body to match that distorted voice. It's then that I hear it again on the path right behind me. What the hell? It warbles, like it's learned a phrase for the first time and it's trying it out loud. And then I'm running. I'm barely touching the ground, feet flying down the tight forest trail in the late afternoon sun. Tree branches are slapping at me as I barrel down the path, careless, mindless. My nerves are on a knife's edge for the entire sprint back to camp, ears pricked, skin covered in goosebumps. I enter a clearing and slow to walk cautiously into camp, my hand hovering lightly over my Bowie knife. I see my tent in the small clearing where the main trail splits into these smaller tributaries. The tent sits in the shade, flap partially open. I stop, staring at it. It would take about 10 minutes to pack it up. I contemplate it for about half a second. Nope. And then I'm moving again, back on the main trail. Now I'm holding a sustainable jog, but after about 30 seconds later I slide to a stop because I hear something new. And then I hear nothing. A quiet deeper than anything before. No distant birds, no rustling leaves, no quiet breeze or chirping insects. There's only complete and unnatural silence. It's almost suffocating. It's like having a giant glass jar dropped around me. 1 second there's a rich blanket of forest sounds, and then next, it's like I'm in a vacuum. I freeze. I can feel my heart pounding out of my chest, but otherwise I'm as silent and still as the forest around me. The air is hot, still, and dead on my sweaty skin, like standing in a silent summer attic. An odd thought occurs to me, an intuition that I shouldn't move. People always get that feeling like they're being watched. But it isn't quite like that. It's not like being watched. It's like I'm being examined, and my gut's telling me to blend in, to do what the bugs and the birds and the trees are doing. Sit still and wait. Do as they do. This isn't something you run from. Do as they do and survive. So I wait, frozen in an awkward position, mid-stride, mid-breath, refusing to even blink or look around. I stand there like a storm mannequin in the closet, watching through wooden slats, as something very bad looks back at me, trying to figure out if I'm actually a mannequin or just something pretending. We look at each other like that, this force and I, for 10 seconds. My head is swimming with terror. 20 seconds. My lungs are screaming for air and my heart is pounding still. It examines me and suddenly the gaze is broken. It's focused on something else. My vision narrows to a pinpoint because my brain is clamoring for oxygen. Far off, I hear a rustle of leaves, and then slowly it comes my way. Not the rustle of a creature, but a great collective exhale from the forest. The sound of the forest returns in a great sweep past me. I bend, put my hands to my knees, and join in with a heaving gasp of my own. The rest of the trip back is a barely restrained panic. I jump at every twig snapping, but I'm in a forced calm because the logical part of me knows I can't run forever. I set my pace at a brief hike for 2 hours into the late evening. It's getting dark by the time I get back to my property. In the bar, my friends are all statues, still faces slack. No one's touched their drink in 5 minutes. My whole body's shaking as I absent-mindedly run the fingers of both hands up through my hair. It was like I was staring down the barrel of a gun I couldn't see, but I knew that if I had so much as twitched, I wouldn't be here right now. It would have known I was there. It would have known I was real. And I never went back for that tent, I say, taking a sip of my beer and taking a little grim satisfaction in my friends' stunned, distant faces. They let out a few half-hearted, nervous chuckles at my attempt to lighten the mood, but otherwise everyone seems intensely interested in their drinks, the table, or the floor. "Man," one of them eventually says. "Yeah," I reply. We're all pretty quiet and unusually pensive until we pay our tabs and leave the bar. On the way out, one of my buddies pulls me aside and asks, "Was that really true? All of it, I mean?" I just sort of squint and look up at the stars in the Alaskan sky. Eventually, the words I'm looking for come to me. There's stuff out there that no one can explain, things that don't have names. And I think, every now and then, someone comes across one. The smart people, the lucky people like me, are the ones who get to tell their stories. He looks at me for a moment longer, then, seemingly content with my answer, he nods and walks to his car. "Night," he says. Of course, I don't tell him there's more. I don't tell him it wasn't some ethereal, invisible force staring me down in the woods. It was a monster. A lanky, horrid, yet somehow human thing. It was in the shape of a man, but it was no man. God gave me 2 gifts that day. The first was sparing my life, and the other was keeping that creature in the periphery of my vision. I did tireless research after that incident in the forest. I found out about a missing homeless man and the dismembered corpse the cops found in the woods. Parts of a corpse, anyway. And I found out about something called the Acondixity. I think that's how you say it. A follow-up call to the dean from the nearby university got me that. And it got me a meeting with the grandson of the shaman who asked the university to take the speakers down. I met with him the very next day. I don't know how well I can explain it. I don't think of it the same way my grandfather does, Ida says. I follow up immediately, "Try me. You know how everything that's alive today has some of the same DNA? Like if you go back far enough, we all have a common ancestor, even really different things like germs. Well, I think via Condixity are in that family tree. I think they come from something else." He sort of trails off, perhaps expecting skepticism from me. 2 days ago maybe, but he doesn't know that I have a good reason not to be a skeptic. "These things aren't a joke, you know," he tells me, fingers wrapped around a frappuccino. "People at the college think my grandfather's crazy. They only listen to him because he's respected in the tribe. But even though they respect him, most of the tribe thinks he's crazy too. Do you think he's crazy?" I ask him about this. He looks brave, and the sudden seriousness from this man surprises me. "No, he's not crazy. He's not crazy because I saw one. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. I was out in the woods on an ATV, just weaving through trees, and I was going too fast. I was stupid back then. I did a lot of stupid. Anyway, I'm in some pretty sparse woods, so it's easy to see far off, and I see this animal laying down in the distance. I turn my ATV to get closer, and I can tell it's a deer. As I'm pulling up to it, I cut the engine and just rolled to a stop about 20 feet from the thing. I think it must be hurt or something because its back legs aren't working and it's pulling itself along by its front legs. Thinking I'll need to kill it, I go to pull out my knife. As soon as I reach down, this thing's head just snaps towards me. And I don't mean it heard a sound and sort of looked around, then saw me. It just immediately jerked its head right towards me. It didn't look right. It was like someone tried to make a deer but didn't have all the right parts. It was all twisted and gangly with these nasty swollen eyes just staring at me. And I got this feeling like it was trying to figure me out, trying to figure out what I was. And then a couple seconds later, it just turned and dragged itself away. "Wow," I say with real awe. I pushed my ATV as fast as it could go back to the house. And that's when my grandfather told me about the Econ Dixity. He said they were bad spirits that spawned deep in the forest. They're attached to signs of life, noise, sight, stuff like that. And when they find something alive, they sort of copy it, but they disassemble it first. Once they've copied something, they try and find more of it to make a better copy. I don't really know why. It's just what he told me. Most of the time they're harmless, but every now and then one shows up in the shape of a deer, a dog, or something else, and then some men go out and take care of it. Huh. So what did they do about the one you saw? They went out to find a deer, a real deer. When they caught one, they brought it to the Akadixite. The only way to kill him is to make them copy something already dying. We sat in silence there for a moment, drinks forgotten. I saw one. What? He says, surprised. And I think I know why your grandfather wanted the speakers taken down. What he was afraid of, it happened. Wait, slow down. What are you talking about? There's a human, a Condixity out there. A few hours later, we're standing at the trailhead behind my apartment. It's turning into evening now, with only about an hour of real daylight left. There's a group of men nearby from Ida's tribe talking to each other in hushed voices. Behind them are a dozen or so women and children, and some of the women are crying. Ida, what's going on? I ask in whispered tones, but he motions for me to wait. As the circle of shaman breaks up, an older man in his early 60s, who I assume is Ida's grandfather, walks over to us at the entrance to the trail. He doesn't stop to talk to us, but just nods his head in our direction and continues past us down the trail. He has a wiry sort of strength to him despite his age, and the feathered garb and war paint on his body lend him an air of danger. I see an ornate stone dagger on his belt as he goes. Eventually I speak. When's he coming back? And Ida just gives me this flat, mournful look. He isn't coming back. And then I remember Ida's words. The only way to kill them is to make them copy something already dying. For more great stories, make sure to check out the author's podcast. I'll put a link in the description. Thanks for listening. On Screen Text. Darkness. Silence. A man's gasp shattered the stillness. He thrashed icy water sloshing against cold porcelain. His eyes flew open, met by blurry shadows and the faint glow of streetlights filtering through a grimy window. He was submerged in a bathtub, ice water chilling him to the bone. His hand flew to his side, encountering a raw, throbbing pain. He was stitched up, the incision a grotesque mockery of a surgeon's skill. Panic seized him. His mind, foggy and disoriented, struggled to make sense of the situation. He remembered the alley, the feeling of being watched, then nothing. Now this, the bathtub, the pain, the chilling realization that something was terribly wrong. His pulse quickened, drumming against his eardrums. His breath hitched in his chest. A single word escaped his lips, a desperate plea for answers in the suffocating silence. Help! He lurched forward, the room tilting precariously. The world swam back into focus, revealing the squalor of the dilapidated bathroom. Peeling paint clung to the walls like scabs, and the air hung heavy with the stench of mildew and decay. The only light came from a flickering neon sign outside the window, casting an eerie glow across the room. The man stumbled out of the tub, his legs shaky beneath him. He caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked mirror above the sink. His face was pale, etched with fear, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked like a ghost haunting this forgotten place. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he leaned against the sink for support. He had to get out of here. He had to find help. But a chilling thought rooted him to the spot. What if he was already beyond help? A low hum vibrated in the air, barely audible at first. He paused, straining to identify the sound. It wasn't the plumbing, nor the groan of the old building. This was something different, something sinister. As he listened closer, the hum morphed into a whisper, faint and ethereal. "Don't trust," the voice whispered, the words fragmented and chilling. His head snapped towards the source, but the bathroom was empty. He was alone, or was he? The whispers grew louder, multiplying, swirling around him like a chorus of the damned. Terror constricted his throat. These were not the voices of the living. They seeped from the very walls, filled with an unspeakable anguish that sent shivers down his spine. They spoke of unimaginable pain, of stolen lives, of a darkness that consumed everything in its path. He pressed his hands against his ears, but the whispers only intensified, seeping into his mind, his very being. They told tales of terror, of victims snatched from the shadows, their lives extinguished like flickering candles. Each whisper ended with the same chilling fate, a life traded for a beating heart, a functioning liver, a pair of healthy lungs. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a victim, he was next. His life, his very essence, was hanging by a thread, a commodity to be harvested. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had to escape. He had to outrun the whispers, the darkness that threatened to engulf him. But where could he go? Who could he trust when the very air he breathed was filled with the voices of the dead? He sank to the cold tile floor, the whispers swirling around him, each one a sliver of a nightmare. He tried to block them out, to make sense of the impossible, but the voices were relentless, their icy grip tightening around his sanity. One voice rose above the others, clearer, closer, its tone laced with a chilling familiarity. "They took my heart," the voice whispered, each word a sharp shard of ice piercing his soul. "They ripped it from my chest while I was still alive. The pain, unbearable." The voice trembled, a chilling echo of the agony it described. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the voices away. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by blood loss or shock. But deep down, a terrifying certainty began to take root. These voices were real, and they were trying to warn him. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of suffering echoing through the small bathroom. Each voice carried its own tale of terror, a tapestry of pain woven from stolen lives. A young woman, her voice choked with sobs, spoke of being stalked through the shadows, her last moments filled with the stench of decay and the sound of her own racing heartbeat. An old man, his voice raspy and weak, whispered of being dragged from his bed in the dead of night, his pleas for mercy drowned out by the pounding rain and the snarls of the creatures that took him. Each story was a hammer blow to his sanity, pushing him further into the abyss of fear. The bathroom walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the stench of blood and despair. He was trapped in a mausoleum of stolen lives, their voices his only companions in this descent into madness. "They drained me," a voice rasped, its tone devoid of emotion, as hollow as an empty grave. "They took everything, my blood, my life, leaving me an empty shell." A chilling image flashed in his mind, a pale, lifeless body sprawled on a cold floor, 2 puncture marks on its neck, the only indication of the horror that had transpired. He remembered the icy water, the feeling of his own blood, thin and watery, swirling around him in the tub. Had they drained him too? Were they waiting for him to weaken, to become another voiceless victim in their gruesome game? The voice continued, its words like venom seeping into his soul. They discard what they don't need. They leave their victims to rot, to become nothing more than whispers in the dark. He scrambled back against the cold tile, his mind reeling. The whispers were no longer just voices, they were pieces of a horrifying puzzle, each one revealing another layer of the nightmare he was trapped in. He saw flashes of monstrous creatures, their forms shifting and changing in the shadows. Were they vampires? Werewolves? Something else entirely? Something ancient and evil that defied human comprehension? He didn't know, and the uncertainty was almost as terrifying as the creatures themselves. He looked down at his hands, at the strange trembling that ran through them. He was weak, vulnerable, easy prey, but a spark of defiance ignited within him. He refused to be another victim. He would fight, even if it meant facing his demons in the dark. "They're coming for you," a voice whispered, its tone urgent, laced with a desperate warning. "You're marked now. They can smell your fear." He could almost feel their presence, cold and predatory, lurking just beyond the veil of darkness that surrounded him. He knew he couldn't stay here. The bathroom was a tomb, and he was next in line for the slab. He had to find a way out, a way to escape the nightmare that had become his reality. He had to warn someone, to tell them what was happening in this city of shadows. But who would believe him? Who would believe that monsters walked among them, their hunger masked by the darkness, their crimes hidden in the whispers of the dead? The first distinct voice he could make out was high-pitched, laced with a delicate tremor. It spoke of a young woman, a dancer with dreams as bright as the stage lights she longed to command. Her story unfolded like a tragic ballet, each movement meticulously described, each twirl ending in a terrifying crescendo. "They took my legs," the voice whispered, the words sharp and brittle like bones snapping under a sudden unbearable weight. I could feel the steel slicing, the cold seeping into my very core. He imagined her strapped to a table, her lithe limbs brutally severed, her dreams dying with each drop of blood that stained the floor. The voice trembled, a chilling echo of the agony it described. "They left me there, a broken doll, unable to dance, unable to feel the rhythm of life pulse through me." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken pain, a stark reminder of the darkness that permeated this place. Section 2. The Artist's Anguish. Then came a deeper voice, rough around the edges, thick with unshed tears. It belonged to an artist, a man who saw the world in vibrant hues, who translated emotions onto canvas with a stroke of his brush. His story was a masterpiece of suffering, each brushstroke a testament to the horrors he had endured. "They stole my eyes," the voice rasped, each word a tortured breath. "They plunged their instruments into my sockets, ripping away my sight, my ability to capture the beauty of the world." The man in the bathtub shuddered, picturing the artist's world reduced to an impenetrable darkness, his canvases forever blank. "They craved my vision," the voice continued, a chilling mix of pain and resignation. "They wanted to see the world through my eyes, to experience the vibrancy of colors I alone could perceive. But the monsters, he knew, were blind to true beauty, their souls as empty as the canvases they left behind." Section 3. The Musician's Silence. A hauntingly beautiful melody played on a distant piano drifted through the air, filling the room with an ethereal presence that seemed almost otherworldly, only to be abruptly cut short. It was the musician, a young man whose soul sang through his fingertips, each note a testament to his passion and pain, his music a symphony of emotions that touched the very core of those who listened. "They took my hands," the voice whispered, a tremor of sorrow and anger in its tone. The melody replaced with a chilling silence. My fingers, my tools of creation, were deemed worthy of their grotesque harvest. The man in the bathtub imagined the musician's raw, bleeding stumps, a vision that haunted his every waking moment, the agony of phantom sensations, a cruel reminder of what was lost, the deafening silence where music once flowed. "They sought to steal my gift," the voice continued, a gift that was never theirs to take, a faint tremor running through the words. "They believed that by taking my hands they could claim the power of my music as their own. But music, he knew, sprang from the soul, an essence that could never be captured by mere physical means, not from the dexterity of fingers. The monsters, in their greed, had taken only flesh and bone, leaving behind the true source of his art, leaving behind a void they could never hope to fill, a silence that echoed with the memory of what once was. Section 4. The writer's block. A staccato rhythm, like the tapping of typewriter keys, filled the air only to cease abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. It was the writer, a woman whose words painted vivid pictures, whose stories transported readers to other worlds. Her tale was a chilling narrative, each sentence a testament to the power of words and the horror of their absence. "They stole my voice," the whisper rasped, the words heavy with unshed tears. "They cut out my tongue, silencing the stories that flowed from my mind to my fingertips." The man in the bathtub recoiled, imagining the writer's world reduced to a silent prison, her thoughts trapped behind a wall of pain and fear. The whispers were no longer individual tales of horror. They had merged into a single deafening chorus, a cacophony of fear and despair that pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. They spoke of time running out, of a deadline he couldn't see but could feel closing in with every panicked breath. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging him to action. The surgical scar on his side throbbed in sync with his pulse, a constant reminder of his vulnerability, of the precious thing that had been stolen, of the even more precious thing they still sought. His life. He had to get out. Now, this bathroom, this building, this entire city block felt like a giant living organism closing in on him, ready to digest him into its depths, adding his voice to the chorus of the damned. The whispers were everywhere now, seeping from the cracks in the walls, slithering out from the overflowing drain, swirling around him like a vortex of terror. They whispered of the city above, a labyrinth of shadows and secrets where monsters walked unseen, their true faces hidden behind masks of normalcy. They spoke of hospitals, once places of healing, now transformed into butcher shops, reeking of formaldehyde and fear. They described operating tables stained crimson, scalpels glinting under harsh surgical lights, and the muffled screams of the unwilling donors forever silenced. The man felt a surge of nausea, the metallic tang of blood filling his mouth. He was trapped in a city that had become a breeding ground for monsters, a place where humanity was slowly being extinguished, one stolen organ, one whispered scream at a time. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to pull him back down. He had to move. He had to find a way out before the darkness swallowed him whole. His eyes darted around the small bathroom, searching for any possible escape route, any sign of a weapon, anything that could help him fight back against the unseen terror that surrounded him. The doorknob felt icy cold against his trembling hand. He hesitated for a moment, his mind flooded with images of the horrors that awaited him on the other side. But the whispers, those damn whispers, urged him forward, reminding him that staying here was not an option. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the unknown. He had to believe that somewhere out there in the heart of this city of whispers, there was still a flicker of hope, a chance for survival, a way to silence the voices that haunted him. The hallway outside the bathroom was a shadowy labyrinth, the air thick with the stench of mildew and decay. The flickering neon sign from the street cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed on the walls, like phantoms come to life. The silence was almost as unnerving as the whispers, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant dripping of water. He could still hear them, the whispers. They were fainter now, more distant, but still there, echoing through the corridors of his mind. They urged him forward, guiding him deeper into the heart of the nightmare, promising revelations that chilled him to the bone. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay here. This building, this entire city felt like a trap, and he was the prey. He had to find a way to break free, to escape the clutches of the darkness that threatened to consume him. As he reached for the doorknob, a sound cut through the silence, a sound so unexpected, so incongruous with the nightmare he was trapped in. that it stopped him dead in his tracks. It was the sound of music, faint but unmistakable. A melody played on a piano, the notes hesitant at first as if testing the silence, then growing stronger, more confident, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. He had to find the source of that music. It was his only hope, his only guide in this labyrinth of shadows and fear. He had to believe that where there was music, there was still a spark of humanity left, a chance for survival, a way to fight back against the monsters that hunted in the dark. The music drew him in, a siren song in the heart of darkness. It was as if the notes themselves were alive, whispering secrets and promises that he couldn't quite grasp, but felt compelled to follow. He pushed open the door, stepping from the shadowy hallway into a room bathed in an ethereal golden light. The warmth of the light seemed to embrace him, offering a stark contrast to the cold, unwelcoming darkness he had just left behind. It was a stark contrast to the dingy bathroom, the oppressive hallway, the entire grim narrative he'd been living. The room was luxurious, adorned with a crystal chandelier and antique furniture, a world away from the squalor he had known. For a moment he forgot the whispers, the terror, the chilling realization of his situation. In this room he felt a fleeting sense of peace, a temporary reprieve from the relentless fear that had gripped him. All that remained was the music and the warm, inviting glow. The piano keys gleamed under the golden light, each note resonating with a clarity that seemed to cleanse his soul. The melody flowed from the piano, a cascade of notes both mournful and beautiful, like a memory of something lost. It was a haunting tune, filled with longing and sorrow, yet it held a strange comfort. A figure sat at the instrument, their back to him, their fingers dancing across the keys with an effortless grace that stole his breath. The musicians seemed to be in a world of their own, lost in the music. The music seemed to wrap around him, soothing his ragged nerves, calming the frantic beating of his heart. It was as if the melody had a life of its own, reaching out to him, offering solace. He took a step closer, drawn to the music like a moth to a flame. Each step felt like a journey, a movement towards something profound and transformative. As he moved, his shadow stretched out before him, a dark silhouette against the polished wooden floor, a stark reminder of the nightmare he couldn't escape. Yet in this moment, the nightmare seemed distant, held at bay by the power of the music and the light. The figure at the piano continued to play, oblivious to his presence, or were they? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that this entire scene, this beautiful, haunting melody, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, a spiderweb spun to lure him in. He took another step, his hand instinctively reaching out to touch the figure's shoulder, to break the spell, to demand answers. But as he did, the music stopped abruptly, the silence that followed as sharp and deafening as a scream. The figure at the piano slowly turned, their face hidden in shadow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice rasped, the words slithering through the silence like venom. The music, the light, the illusion of peace. The figure rose from the piano bench, stepping into the light, and for the first time he saw their face. It wasn't human. The face that stared back at him was a grotesque mockery of human features, a patchwork of stolen flesh and bone stretched taut over a frame that radiated an unnatural strength. The eyes, though, those were what chilled him to the core. They were the eyes of a predator, cold, calculating, and devoid of any trace of empathy. Claws sharp as shards of glass glinted in the golden light, extending from fingertips that moments ago had danced across the piano keys with such haunting grace. The creature before him was a masterpiece of deception, a wolf in sheep's clothing, its beauty a lure, its music a siren song leading to a gruesome demise. Terror, primal and instinctive, surged through him, urging him to turn and run, to flee back into the darkness he had just escaped. But his legs felt rooted to the spot, his body frozen in place by a fear so profound it bordered on paralysis. "You seem surprised," the creature purred, its voice a low growl that vibrated through the room. "Did you truly believe you could escape? This city is our hunting ground, and you, my dear, are the prey." It took a step closer, its movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its kill. The man stumbled back, his hand instinctively going to the surgical scar on his side, a constant reminder of his vulnerability, of the precious thing that had been stolen. He had to fight back. He had to find a way to survive this encounter. But how could he possibly fight a creature born of nightmares, a creature that seemed to feed on fear itself? "Don't bother looking for a way out," the creature chuckled, its voice echoing through the room. "There is no escape, not from us, not from what you've become." The words struck him like a physical blow. What did it mean? What had he become? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more terrifying than the last. He felt a chill run down his spine, as if the very air around him had turned cold and hostile. He glanced back at the mirror, his heart pounding in his chest. Each beat felt like a drum signaling impending doom. He could hardly recognize the person staring back at him. His reflection stared back at him, a stranger in the looking glass. The eyes that met his were not his own, but those of someone or something else entirely. His eyes seemed different, sharper, hungrier. They glinted with a predatory gleam that sent shivers down his spine. His skin had taken on a sickly pallor, and a thin line of red, like a freshly drawn incision, pulsed at his side, mirroring the surgical scar on his own body. It was as if his very flesh was rebelling against him. The whispers, once distant echoes of terror, now roared in his ears, their voices no longer those of victims, but of something else, something darker, something that resonated with the growing hunger he felt within. They seemed to be calling to him, urging him to give in. He was changing. The transformation was not just physical, but something deeper, something that touched his very soul. He could feel it happening, a transformation taking root in his very core. Fight or flight. The age-old dilemma surged within him, more urgent than ever. The primal instinct warred within him. Every fiber of his being screamed for action. But which path would he choose? Could he outrun this creature, this destiny that seemed to be closing in? The thought of escape seemed both impossible and imperative, or would he embrace the darkness that beckoned, becoming the very monster that he feared? The choice loomed before him, as inevitable as the rising tide. A primal scream erupted from his throat, a raw, guttural sound that shattered the illusion of elegance that had cloaked the room. It was the sound of his humanity tearing, the last gasp of the man he had been, the birth cry of the monster he was becoming. The creature before him, the hunter, merely smiled, a slow, predatory stretching of its lips that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. The hunger was a living thing inside him now, a ravenous beast demanding to be fed. He could feel his senses sharpening, his vision blurring at the edges as his pupils dilated, taking in the subtle shifts in light and shadow, the faintest scent of blood and fear emanating from the creature before him. The creature took a step back, its smile never faltering. "Yes," it hissed, its voice a sibilant whisper that cut through the man's roar. "Embrace it. Become what you were meant to be. Join us in the feast." The man lunged, his body moving with a speed and agility he hadn't possessed moments before. The transformation, whatever it was, had amplified his strength, his reflexes, turning him into a predator as deadly as the creature he faced. But the creature was ready for him. It moved with a grace that belied its monstrous form, sidestepping the man's attack with ease. He slammed into the wall, the impact jarring him to his core. But the pain was dulled, muted by the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the primal urge to survive, to hunt, to feed. He could hear the creature's laughter echoing through the room, a mocking counterpoint to the roaring in his ears. He had to end this, now. He couldn't fight it any longer, this transformation, this hunger that threatened to consume him. But he could use it. He could turn it against the very creature that had awakened it within him. He didn't remember making the decision. It was more like an instinct, a primal urge that bypassed thought. and went straight for the jugular. He became a whirlwind of motion, a predator unleashed, his newfound speed and agility catching the creature off guard. They battled through the luxurious room, crashing through furniture, their roars and snarls echoing off the walls. He tasted blood, his own and the creature's, a metallic tang that only fueled the frenzy coursing through him. He was vaguely aware of the creature's surprise, the way its laughter turned to a pained hiss as his claws found purchase, tearing through flesh and bone with ease. But even as he fought, a part of him recognized the futility of it all. This wasn't a battle he could win, not really. He was a fledgling monster, barely aware of its own power, facing a creature that had honed its skills over countless hunts, countless victims. He used the creature's momentary shock to his advantage, channeling every ounce of strength he possessed into one final desperate blow. He rammed his shoulder into the creature's chest, hearing a sickening crack as he connected, feeling the creature's breath leave its lungs in a rush of air and blood. They crashed through the window, a shower of shattered glass, and tumbled into the alley below. The man landed hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, stunned, his ears ringing, the taste of blood filling his mouth. He slowly pushed himself up, his vision swimming. He looked around, disoriented. The alley was empty, the creature gone. Had he imagined it all? Had the transformation, the fight, been nothing more than a hallucination brought on by blood loss and terror? He flexes his fingers, staring at the blood staining his skin, the remnants of his transformation. It had not been a dream. Then he saw it, a trail of blood glistening in the pale morning light, leading out of the alley and into the maze of city streets beyond. The creature was still out there, wounded but alive. And the hunger, the insatiable hunger that now pulsed within him, urged him to follow, to finish what he had started. He took a step, then another, following the trail of blood into the heart of the city. The whispers, once distant echoes of terror, now swirled around him, stronger than ever. A chorus of voices welcoming him into the fold. He was no longer just a man, he was something else, something monstrous, something hungry. Ethan Carter stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching under his worn boots. The old Victorian house loomed before him, a silhouette against the fading light. Home. He carried with him the weight of memories, both fond and faded, like old photographs tucked away in a dusty album. The porch creaked a familiar welcome as he ascended the steps. Each step seemed to echo with the ghosts of laughter and hushed whispers from his past. It had been years since he'd last crossed this threshold, years spent trying to outrun the shadows of his lineage. But some bonds, like the scent of old wood and the echo of time, could not be severed. He found his grandfather Samuel in his usual spot by the fireplace, a frail silhouette against the flickering flames. The years had weathered him, etched lines upon his face like cracks in a forgotten monument. Yet his eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of the man Ethan remembered. "Ethan," Samuel rasped, his voice a dry whisper, "you came." His words held a mixture of surprise and a dark undercurrent that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. It was the tone of a man who had long made peace with his solitude, a solitude that Ethan's arrival had abruptly shattered. Ethan settled into the worn armchair across from his grandfather, accepting the glass of amber liquid offered. The scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic hung in the air, a disquieting aroma that he couldn't quite place. It tugged at the edges of his memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. "It's good to be back," Ethan lied, forcing a smile. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. The house felt heavy, burdened with a silence that seemed to hum with unspoken truths. It was the silence of secrets kept for far too long. He remembered childhood summers spent exploring the woods behind the house, the thrill of hide and seek among the towering trees. He remembered his grandfather's stories, tales spun from darkness and folklore, tales that had both fascinated and terrified him. But there were other memories too. Memories that surfaced like corpses in a stagnant pond. Flashes of fear, of hushed whispers and hurried goodbyes. The neighbors, their faces etched with worry, their eyes avoiding his own. And always the lingering scent of iron and decay clinging to the air like a shroud. The longer Ethan stayed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the silence, nor the weight of his grandfather's gaze. It was something else, something insidious that seeped from the very foundation of the house. The stench hit him first, a wave of putrid sweetness that turned his stomach. It was the smell of rot, of something long dead and festering. It emanated from the basement door, a heavy oak door secured with a rusty padlock. He remembered his grandfather warning him, his voice raspy with an unspoken threat never to venture down there. Curiosity warred with apprehension. What secrets did those shadowed depths hold? What was his grandfather so desperate to conceal? The questions gnawed at him, fueled by the ever-present stench and the unsettling feeling that he was not alone in the house. He decided to confront his grandfather, to demand answers, but as he turned to face the old man, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a soft thud, followed by a muffled scraping sound coming from the direction of the basement door. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped him. Whatever lay hidden beneath the house was stirring, and it was hungry. Days turned into nights. Ethan tried to ignore the stench, the unsettling sounds from the basement. He told himself it was the old house settling, his imagination running wild. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. One afternoon, while searching for his grandfather's pipe, Ethan stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the attic. Inside, nestled amongst old books and cobwebs, lay a hunting knife. It was ornate, the handle carved with intricate designs. He picked it up, the metal cold against his skin. As he turned it over, his blood ran cold. Dried stains, the color of rust, but with a metallic tang that spoke of something far more sinister, marred the blade. The scent of iron, faint but unmistakable, wafted up to him. It was the same scent that clung to the air in the house, the scent that haunted his dreams. Ethan's hand trembled as he placed the knife back in its hiding place. His mind raced, piecing together fragmented memories, whispers from his childhood. The neighbors had always whispered about his grandfather, about his strange ways, his reclusive nature. Now those whispers morphed into screams of warning in Ethan's ears. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Ethan began to explore the house with renewed purpose. He found himself drawn back to his grandfather's study, a room filled with the scent of old paper and forgotten memories. It was there, in a dusty corner, that he stumbled upon a stack of old newspapers. His heart pounded in his chest as he skimmed through the yellowed pages. Each headline screamed of tragedy, of lives cut short, of people vanishing without a trace. Local farmer vanishes, no sign of foul play. Young woman disappears from hiking trail. Another missing person case baffles authorities. The dates spanned decades, but a chilling pattern emerged. Each disappearance had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the house, and each victim had vanished without a trace. The articles offered no answers, only speculation and a growing sense of unease. Ethan's gaze fell upon a photograph accompanying one of the articles. A young woman, her face frozen in a smile, stared back at him. Her eyes seemed to hold a flicker of recognition, a plea for help that transcended time. He recognized her. She had been their neighbor years ago. She had vanished one summer evening, never to be seen again. The locked shed stood at the edge of the property, shrouded in shadow even during the day. Ethan had always been drawn to it as a child, his curiosity piqued by the forbidden nature of the place. But his grandfather had forbidden him from ever going near it. Now, fueled by his suspicions, Ethan approached the shed with a mix of trepidation and grim determination. The air hung heavy around it, thick with the cloying scent of decay and something else. Something metallic that made his stomach churn. The padlock securing the door was old but sturdy. Ethan fumbled with the lock, his hands slick with sweat. The sound of the metal scraping against metal seemed to echo through the silence, amplified by his racing heart. Finally, with a groan, the lock gave way. Hesitantly, Ethan pushed the door open. The hinges protested with a shriek that sent a shiver down his spine. The interior was dark and cramped, the air thick with dust and the overpowering stench of decay. Ethan covered his mouth and nose with his sleeve, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped inside the shed. The stench was unbearable, a mix of decay and chemicals. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers trembling. The beam cut through the darkness. It was then that he saw it. A shape beneath rotting wood and rusted tools, a shape that made his blood run cold. It was a human hand, pale and waxy, fingers curled into a claw. Ethan stumbled back, catching on a loose floorboard. He fell to his knees, transfixed by the discovery. As his eyes adjusted, he realized it wasn't just a hand, it was an entire arm, severed at the elbow. Suddenly, a noise from outside startled him. He scrambled to his feet. Someone was out there. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Panic surged. He had to get out of there. The discovery in the shed sent Ethan reeling. He stumbled back to the house, his mind a maelstrom of fear and disbelief. His grandfather, the man who had read him bedtime stories, the man who had taught him how to fish, was a monster, a murderer. He thought back to his childhood, to the strange occurrences he had dismissed as an overactive imagination. The whispers from the townsfolk, the fear in their eyes when they looked at him, at his grandfather, the times he had woken in the night to muffled screams coming from the woods, the metallic tang of blood in the air. It all made sense now. The missing persons reports, the locked shed, the stench of decay that permeated the house. His grandfather was a predator, and the house was his hunting ground. But how many victims were there, and how long had this been going on? Ethan felt a surge of anger, of betrayal, but more than anything, he felt a bone-chilling fear. He had stumbled upon a secret that was never meant to be unearthed, and now he knew too much. Ethan knew he couldn't stay in the house a moment longer. He had to get help, had to alert the authorities, but first he had to confront his grandfather, had to know the truth. He found Samuel in his study, sitting in his armchair by the fire. The old man looked up as Ethan entered, a flicker of something cold and calculating in his eyes. "You know, don't you?" Samuel asked, his voice raspy. Ethan said nothing. He couldn't speak. The words were trapped in his throat, choked by the fear that clawed at him. "You've seen what's in the shed," Samuel continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Curious, aren't you? Always have been." "Why?" Ethan finally choked out. "Why, grandfather?" Samuel chuckled, a low guttural sound that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "Why?" he repeated. "Because it's in my blood, boy. It's who I am." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You're a monster," he whispered. Samuel's eyes hardened. "Monster!" he spat. "I am no monster. I am a predator, and you, my boy, are prey." Ethan stumbled back, his grandfather's words echoing in his ears. Prey. He was prey in his own childhood home. Fury battled with terror, urging him to act. His grandfather was a monster, but maybe, just maybe, he could stop him. The basement, the source of the stench, the whispers, the terror. He had to go back. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent of blood and decay as he descended the creaking stairs. The musty darkness felt alive, closing in on him, threatening to swallow him whole. He fumbled for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, revealing walls stained with dampness and something far more sinister. His gaze fell upon a section of the wall that seemed different, less worn, as if it had been concealed. With a grunt, he pressed against the wall, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden passage, the hidden room, the source of his nightmares. The room was small, cramped, the air thick with the dust of ages and the lingering scent of death. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light, illuminating a scene that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with gruesome trophies. Not the heads of hunted animals, but something far more terrifying. Human teeth, yellowed and cracked, filled glass jars. A withered hand, its fingers curled into a silent scream, rested on a dusty display stand. A necklace, its silver chain tarnished with time, held a locket containing a lock of hair, a woman's hair. Ethan's stomach churned, the bile rising in his throat. Each item told a silent story of suffering, a life brutally extinguished. His gaze fell upon a leather-bound journal lying open on a makeshift table. He picked it up, his hands shaking. The pages were filled with his grandfather's spidery handwriting, a chilling chronicle of each victim, their capture, their torment, their end. The words swam before his eyes, each one a searing brand against his soul. His grandfather wasn't just a monster. He was a meticulous chronicler of his own depravity. Ethan slammed the journal shut, his stomach clenching with disgust and burgeoning horror. His gaze swept around the room, taking in the gruesome tableau with a detached sense of disbelief. It was a nightmare, a macabre museum dedicated to death and despair. He noticed a map pinned to the wall, dotted with red X's. Each X marked a location, a chilling testament to the scope of his grandfather's crimes. But what chilled him to the bone were the two X's without dates, their locations eerily close to home, recent victims. The realization struck him like a physical blow. His grandfather wasn't finished, he was still hunting. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He had stumbled upon a truth too monstrous to comprehend, a secret that threatened to consume him. He had to get out, had to warn someone, anyone. But as he turned to leave, a sound froze him in his tracks, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps descending the stairs. The basement door creaked open, sending a shaft of light into the darkness. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ducked behind a shelf, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Ethan!" His grandfather's voice rasped, a chilling counterpoint to the silence. "I know you're down here." Ethan peeked cautiously from behind the shelf. Samuel stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face illuminated by the dim light. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were sharp, alert, a predatory gleam in their depths. "I knew you'd be curious," Samuel continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You always were such an inquisitive child." He took a step closer, his shadow stretching across the floor like a grasping hand. "You shouldn't have seen this, Ethan," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now we have to play a different game." Section 5. Nowhere to run. Ethan's blood ran cold. A game? This wasn't a game. It was a nightmare. His own grandfather, the man who was supposed to protect him, was hunting him. He was trapped, the house a prison, the silence thick with menace. He had to escape. He watched as Samuel moved slowly towards the hidden room, his footsteps echoing ominously in the confined space. This was his chance. Ethan darted out from behind the shelf, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear Samuel's muffled curse as he realized Ethan had moved. He raced towards the stairs, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for respite. Ethan's foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending him sprawling onto the damp concrete floor. Section 6. A desperate plea. The basement door loomed before him, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. He fumbled for the handle, his fingers slick with sweat and adrenaline. The door swung open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. "Grandfather, please," Ethan cried out, his voice hoarse with fear and desperation. Samuel stopped at the foot of the stairs, his eyes burning into Ethan. A humorless laugh escaped his lips, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty house. "Help?" he spat. "There's no help for what I am, Ethan. No help." Section 1. Hunted. Adrenaline surged through Ethan's veins, masking the pain in his ankle as he limped down the hallway. The house, once a sanctuary of childhood memories, had transformed into a hunting ground. Each creaking floorboard, each flickering shadow whispered of his grandfather's approach. Samuel was closing in, his gait slow but relentless, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. Ethan lunged for the living room, his lungs screaming for air. The front door, his only escape. He scrambled towards the heavy oak door, his hand reaching for the doorknob, locked. His grandfather had anticipated his every move, turning his childhood home into a meticulously crafted death trap. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to consume him. He whirled around, his back against the door, his eyes scanning the room for a weapon, an escape, anything. Samuel stalked closer, his shadow falling over Ethan like a suffocating blanket. He held the hunting knife, its blade glinting ominously in the dim light. "You cannot escape your blood, Ethan," Samuel rasped. His gaze fell upon a heavy fireplace poker leaning against the mantel. As Samuel raised the hunting knife, ready to strike, Ethan lunged. He grabbed the fireplace poker, its weight surprisingly reassuring in his hand. He swung it with all his might, the metal whistling through the air. The poker connected with Samuel's arm with a sickening thud. A cry of pain escaped his grandfather's lips as the knife clattered to the floor. Samuel stumbled back, clutching his arm, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and surprise. The momentary respite gave Ethan the opportunity he needed. Ethan dodged out of the way just in time, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't overpower his grandfather in a direct confrontation. He had to use his wits, his knowledge of the house, to outsmart him. He sprinted towards the grand staircase, his limp forgotten in the heat of the moment. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his eyes scanning the upper landing. There, partially hidden beneath an ornate rug, lay his only hope, a bear trap, a relic from his grandfather's hunting days, its jaws gaping open like a metal maw. "This ends now, Ethan!" Samuel roared from below. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he dragged the heavy rug, inch by agonizing inch, revealing the deadly trap beneath. He had seconds, maybe less, before Samuel reached the top of the stairs. "Give up, boy," Samuel's voice echoed from the stairwell. Ethan ignored him, his focus solely on the task at hand. He gave the rug one final tug, sending it sliding across the polished wooden floor. The bear trap glinted in the dim light, its jaws sprung open, a silent invitation to a gruesome end. "You should have stayed away," Samuel hissed. Ethan dove to the side just as Samuel's foot landed on the rug. Ethan scrambled back, his blood turning to ice as he watched his grandfather thrash on the floor, his leg caught in the unforgiving jaws of the bear trap. The rug was stained crimson, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. Samuel's eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment Ethan saw a flicker of something akin to regret in their depths, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a look of pure, primal rage. "You will pay!" Samuel gasped, each word punctuated by a surge of pain. Ethan wanted to look away, to erase the image of his grandfather, his own flesh and blood, broken and defeated. But something held him there, something in the way Samuel looked at him. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, a grotesque perfume that seemed to cling to Ethan's throat, choking him. His grandfather, his leg mangled in the bear trap, was no longer the imposing figure he once was. Yet, the fear remained, sharper, colder than before. Samuel's laughter, a broken, wheezing sound, cut through the silence. "You think this ends here?" he rasped. "You think you've won?" Ethan stared down at his grandfather, his stomach churning. The old man was right. This wasn't over. This house, steeped in blood and secrets, held him captive as surely as any chains. He was never alone. Panic clawed at Ethan's throat, threatening to consume him. He had to get out, had to escape the suffocating presence that had settled over the house. But his feet felt rooted to the spot, his body unwilling to move. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a vortex of despair. They spoke of his grandfather's victims, their voices echoing through the years, their agony seeping into the very walls of the house. He slammed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, the feeling of unseen hands reaching for him. "There's no escape," they hissed. "He is here." Driven by a desperate need to understand, to make sense of the madness that had enveloped him, Ethan stumbled towards his grandfather's study. The room, once a sanctuary of knowledge and comfort, now felt oppressive, the air thick with the weight of secrets. His gaze fell upon a large ornate mirror hanging above the fireplace. It had always been there, a silent sentinel watching over the room, its surface reflecting generations of his family. But now, as he stared into its depths, he saw something more, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. The reflection in the mirror wasn't his own. It was the face of his grandfather, younger, stronger, his eyes burning with a cold, calculating light. And behind him, barely visible in the shadows, stood another figure and another, each one bearing a chilling resemblance to Samuel. A long-forgotten memory flickered at the edge of Ethan's mind. His grandmother, her face pale and drawn, whispering to him about a curse, a darkness that had plagued their family for generations. The journal. He had to find the journal. Ethan whirled around, his eyes scanning the room, searching for the leather-bound book that held his grandfather's twisted confessions. He found it lying open on the desk, its pages filled with spidery handwriting, each word a testament to a life stolen, a soul extinguished. His heart pounded in his chest as he read, his stomach clenching with each horrifying detail. It wasn't just the murders, it was the way they were carried out, the rituals, the sacrifices. A horrifying realization dawned on him. He wasn't meant to escape. He was meant to take his place in the lineage of monsters. The whispers in the walls seemed to intensify, swirling around him, their voices filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Ethan sank to his knees, the weight of his family's sins crushing him. How could he possibly escape this? How could he outrun the darkness that flowed through his veins? He glanced back at the mirror, at the reflection of his ancestors watching him with cold, calculating eyes. They had been trapped in this cycle for generations, their souls bound to the house, their humanity consumed by the darkness. Was he destined to follow the same path? The whispers in the walls offered no comfort, only a chilling reminder of his heritage. But even as despair threatened to drown him, a flicker of defiance ignited within him. He would find a way to break the cycle, to end this reign of terror once and for all. A low rumble of thunder shook the house, the sound echoing through the silence like a warning. The storm that had been brewing all day had finally broken, unleashing its fury upon the world outside. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind howling like a banshee in the chimney. Time was running out. He could hear Samuel downstairs, his cries of pain replaced by a low, guttural growl. The bear trap wouldn't hold him for long. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, his gaze sweeping the room, searching for anything that could help him, protect him. He had to end this, for himself, for his family, for the innocent lives that had been lost. The house was alive, and it was calling to him. The rhythmic pounding grew louder, urging Ethan forward, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors of the house. The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in his soul. Lightning illuminated stained glass windows, casting grotesque shadows that danced around him like phantoms. The air crackled with energy, and the scent of ozone mingled with the ever-present metallic tang of blood. He found his grandfather in the living room where their confrontation had begun. Samuel had managed to free himself from the bear trap, leaving a trail of blood and splintered bone in his wake. He was hunched over a trunk, his back to Ethan, his shoulders heaving. "You can't escape it, Ethan," Samuel rasped, his voice barely audible above the storm. "It's in your blood. It's who you are." Ethan's grip tightened on the fireplace poker, his knuckles white. He'd heard the words before, but now they held a terrifying weight. "I was waiting for the right moment," Samuel chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He turned, a chilling smile spreading across his blood-stained lips. "To groom you, to mold you into my successor, but you He trailed off, his smile fading into a grimace of pain. "You forced my hand." The pounding in Ethan's ears reached a fever pitch, drowning out the storm, his grandfather's words. He saw the madness in Samuel's eyes, the hunger that mirrored the whispers of the house. He knew with a sickening certainty that his grandfather was beyond redemption. "I'm sorry, grandfather," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. He raised the fireplace poker, his hand trembling. "But this ends now." The blow was swift, brutal, a sickening thud of metal against bone. The light faded from Samuel's eyes, replaced by a vacant stare that spoke of a darkness finally extinguished. Ethan stumbled back, dropping the poker, his stomach churning. He had just killed a man, his own grandfather. But as the echoes of the blow faded, a strange sense of peace settled over him. The pounding in his ears subsided, replaced by an eerie silence. The house, as if sensing the shift in power, fell still. The storm outside seemed to calm, the wind dying down to a low moan. Ethan spent hours in a daze, cleaning up the scene and calling the authorities. No one questioned his story. Samuel Carter was a monster. As the sun rose, Ethan stood on the porch. Watching the police cars disappear, he knew the house would never be free. The echoes of pain were etched into its foundation. The sun glinted off something in the attic window, a hunting knife. Ethan knew some evils never die. He would be haunted by the echoes of the past, forever tethered to the house that held his family's darkest secrets.